نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم ألهمنا مراشد أمورنا وأعذنا من شرور أنفسنا أما بعد. Beloved brothers and sisters and esteemed and honorable guests of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I'm reading from a book which is titled Tabligh-e-Deen, which is actually a summary of Imam Ghazali rahimahullah's Al-Arba'in fi Usul ad-Din, the 40 principles of Deen, which has been summarized by Mawlana Ashraf Ali Thani rahimahullah and then was translated by one of our guests and one of the our teachers, Mawlana Musa Kaji. He was here about, I think, sometime last year, if anyone remembers. And one of the principles discussed in the book is the principle of shukar and being grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are many different ways that a person can attain the closeness and proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through ilm, through learning much more knowledge. A person can come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through mujahada, through sacrifice. A person can come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through sabr and patience. And a person can come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through dhikr, excessive amounts of dhikr, excessive amounts of amal. And one of the ways that a person can come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is through shukr, by being appreciative to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of the various different bounties that He is blessed with. And the ulama have mentioned that one of the easiest ways to attain the recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to ascend the ranks in proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is through shukr. It's through being appreciative. And subhanallah, this is something that we see also in the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He mentions in a hadith reported by Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah, "At-ta'imu shakir kas-sa'imi sabir," that individual who eats food and he is thankful, he is appreciative of the food that he eats, kas-sa'imi sabir, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam has mentioned that he is like a person who is fasting and patient. In other words, he will receive a very similar reward. He didn't even go through any mujahada. He didn't go through any difficulty. All he did was that he was grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for what He provided. And yet he will receive a similar reward. Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, he mentions one of the reasons for this is because if you look at all of the other methods, then they are done for secondary reasons. They're not done for a primary reason. It's غير مقصودة. Like you have different types of ibadat. You have ibadah which is maqsuda, like performing salah is to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Fasting is for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then you have other types of ibadah like making wudu. Making wudu is so that you can do other forms of ibadah. So you have ibadah maqsuda and غير maqsuda. Things which are done solely, everything is done for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but certain acts of worship are done just to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and just to worship Him. And then there are other types of worship which are done, there are like keys that will lead towards that. So similarly, when it comes to other things, like when it comes to zuhud, sacrifice, abstinence, lowering your quality of life or staying away from pleasures of life so that you can protect yourself lest you get sucked into the dunya, this is also something which is praiseworthy, something which is mentioned in our deen, something which should be done. But this is done to protect yourself from the dunya, so that you're not led astray. Also, when it comes to sabr, you are exercising patience and you're restraining yourself from speaking out against the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that you do not anger your Creator, so that you can come to terms and so that you can engage in shukr. Without sabr, how are you supposed to make shukr? But shukr is such a thing which is actually maqsood. Shukr is such a thing which is a type of worship that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is one of the most appreciated in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the greatest form of shukr is acknowledging the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and living a life in accordance to that. That is why even in Jannah, everything else will fall off. There won't be any sabr, there won't be any mujahada, there'll be no difficulties whatsoever. But in Jannah, shukr is going to continue. That's why when in Jannah, when the people get to Jannah, they will say, Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana li hadha wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah. It's mentioned in the ahadith that they will be inspired with dhikr and they will be making so much shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There will be so much appreciation for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that every time after they call for something, وَآخِرُ دَعْوَانَا alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, that they will always be mentioning and they will always be engaged in the praises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in appreciating Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because this is such a thing which is ibadah maqsuda. So when it comes to our lives, in order to develop the quality of becoming a shakir, someone who is constantly grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of the blessings, there is a few advices that Imam Ghazali rahimahullah has given. The first advice is, number one, a person requires to have knowledge. And knowledge here can also be understood as recognition, meaning recognizing the different bounties Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed a person with. If a person cannot even recognize the different bounties of Allah, how is he supposed to be grateful? So the ulama, they have even ranked various different bounties that Allah blesses a person with. For example, ilm of deen is a bounty from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. But they have mentioned that perhaps right after knowledge, or some have even said even before knowledge, afiyah is one of the greatest of blessings. And before that, which tops everything else, of course, is iman, being grateful for your iman. And this is something that we see even the prophets would do. Every single prophet would be grateful for his iman, and he would even make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for continued iman. If you look at Ibrahim alayhi salam, وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّ اجْعَلْ هَذَا وَإِذْ يَرْفَعُ إِبْرَاهِيمُ الْقَوَاعِدَ مِنَ الْبَيْتِ وَإِسْمَعِيلُ رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. Right after making the Kaaba, right after building the Kaaba, he could have made dua for anything. It's such an accepted task, such a thing that he knew, subhanAllah, would everyone in creation would then begin to pray around. But if you look at the dua that he made, it was very concise, and it's preserved in the Quran. First, he made dua for acceptance, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts the deed. إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. Then the very next dua, رَبَّنَا وَجَعَلْنَا مُسْلِمَيْنِ لَكَ. He said, oh Allah, make us true Muslims. Enable us to truly submit in your court. He made continued dua for iman and for Islam. And then he didn't just stop at himself and for his son, but he said, وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِنَا أُمَّةً مُسْلِمَةً لَكَ. Also for our progeny. He made dua for his entire progeny till the end of time. وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِنَا أُمَّةً مُسْلِمَةً لَكَ. So this is something that Ibrahim alayhi salam made dua for. Something that Yusuf alayhi salam made dua for. تَوَفَّنَا مُسْلِمِينَ تَوَفَّنِي مُسْلِمًا وَأَلْحِقْنِي بِالصَّالِحِينَ. In Surah Yusuf, towards the end of the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, he had everything. What did he not have at the end of his life? رَبِّي قَدْ آتَيْتِنِي مِنَ الْمُلْكِ وَعَلَّمْتَنِي مِنْ تَأْوِيلِ الْأَحَادِيثِ. You have granted me everything. He had everything that a person could want. He had wealth, he had name, he had fame, he had health, he had knowledge of deen, he had recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He had every single thing that a person could ever want. He had the love of a family. Towards the end of his life, there was nothing that he did not have. So what does a person make dua for when he has everything in life? We see from the story of Yusuf alayhi salam that he made dua for two particular things, tawaffani musliman. And the first thing that he made dua for was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant me death as a Muslim. In other words, preserve this bounty of iman. It's such a great bounty it is indeed. And like that, when you look at the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, this is also something that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam would make dua for. So if the Anbiya alayhi salam would make dua for such a thing and they would appreciate this bounty, then where are we? And when was the last time we made shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for being a mu'min, for being a Muslim? And when was the last time that we made dua for continued iman and continued Islam? This is something the Prophets would make dua for, despite the maqam, despite the status that they reached, the recognition of Allah that was developed in their hearts. Despite that, they would still make continued dua for that. Imagine yourself and myself what dua we require to make. Then after iman comes ilm, and after ilm comes afiyah, well-being, health. Because when a person has health, then he is able to excel and do much more. If a person doesn't have health, then it becomes much more difficult for him. And so on and so forth. But to recognize the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's as simple as conscientizing yourself and reminding yourself again and again and again and again. I remember from, if you look at, the lives of our righteous, pious predecessors, then we will see how much appreciation they had and how they would conscientize themselves and how they would remind themselves to make shukr. I remember very recently, we don't even have to look very far, but in my own life, from some of my own teachers, I remember Mawlana Muhammad, hafidhahullah, his father, Mawlana Harun Abbas Umar, rahimahullah, he passed away when COVID started. Not due to COVID, but when COVID started around there, he passed away. I remember whenever we used to visit his home, so his son is my teacher. And alhamdulillah, he also taught us one or two chapters from Sahih Bukhari. But whenever we used to go to Spingo Beach, it's about 45-50 minutes away from our madrasa, then Mawlana Muhammad Sahib would take us to go visit his father. And whenever we were there, then he would always host us, and he would always give us food, myself and maybe one or two other students. And I remember, subhanAllah, he used to get extremely, extremely upset when we were sitting at the dasarkhan, and then if one of us were to take out a spoon of food and serve him, he would get very upset. He would say, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir falyukrim dayfa." He would say, whoever believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the final day, then he should honor his guest. Are you trying to take away my reward? He would get very upset. And he would say, you are here so that I can serve you. And then after the food would be served, he would be eating and we would all be eating, and you could hear every single time. It wasn't just one time. We went more than 5 times, 6 times. Every single time you're eating in his company, you will hear after every single morsel, Allahumma lakal hamdu wa lakal shukr. Allahumma lakal hamdu wa lakal shukr. He's uttering it underneath his breath. But if you listen attentively, you'll see, Allahumma lakal hamdu wa lakal shukr. After every single bite that he's eating, he's saying, oh Allah, all praises be to you and complete gratitude to you. Allahumma lakal hamdu wa lakal shukr. I remember also from the teachings of our mashayikh, recently I went 2 years ago, may Allah enable me to go multiple more times to South Africa for i'tikaf with my shaykh. On the last time I went, there was one friend of mine who gave me lots of food as soon as he met me, because I'm there for 10 days, 12 days, you don't really get to spend much time. So one friend, mashallah, the day I arrived, he brought me a parcel full of food and different things. And I had to take that around with me wherever I went, so I also took it with me to i'tikaf. We ate a little bit of it in i'tikaf. There was one bag of nuts that I opened up. There was one bag of nuts that I opened up on the first day that I arrived. And second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, 10 days passed, and it was now the day of Eid. And that bag of nuts didn't finish. And it was open the entire time. I didn't have a really good way to seal it. I didn't have any Ziploc bag or any canister or anything. It was basically left in the open. And slowly it's going to get a little bit stale. Granted, they're nuts, but the freshness was no longer there. And you could see it was a half-eaten bag. So I remember on the day of Eid, there was, I was actually staying at the residence of my sheikh. He had two houses on the same premise. And so one of the homes, his father, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him afiyah, he's very sick right now. But he stays alone in his house and he has an extra room. So I was there. And there was one person at the gate of the property. And it was a beggar that came. And this was like the day of Eid. And the beggar came and they were like, do you have anything? And any money, any food? And generally, especially in that part of town, people prefer to give food instead of giving like money, because sometimes the money is not used in the most appropriate ways, especially in those neighboring areas. So they prefer to give food. So it was the day of Eid, so of course they, they had, alhamdulillah, some food. So my sheikh went to get some food, and then I thought, what, this wasn't maybe the best idea of me, but I thought, let me, and it just so happened it coincided with my departure. So I was leaving now to go back home. So I thought, maybe I can just give her the nuts. I'm not going to eat the nuts myself, and I don't think anyone else is going to eat it. Maybe they can benefit from it. So I gave it to my sheikh. And it was kind of embarrassing, but it was kind of funny at the same time. But in it, there's a huge lesson. He thought I was giving him a gift because I was departing. I was leaving now, and I don't know the next time I'm going to see him. So he thought I was giving him a gift. And what gift did he think I was giving him? He thought I was giving him a half-eaten bag of nuts that was left out for so long. And he thought, this is my gift. So what did he do is, he took it, and he was like, Jazakullahu Khairan, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you immensely. And he started making so much dua, and then he lifted the gift, and then he kissed it, and then he was like, this is such an honorable gift. And wallahi alim, without the slightest dissatisfaction, there was no dissatisfaction whatsoever. There wasn't the slightest hint of dissatisfaction you couldn't see on his face. When I realized that he is thinking this is a gift I'm giving him before I'm leaving, then I told him, because I usually call him Hafiz Qasim, I said, Hafiz Sahab, this is not for you. I said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I did not mean to give this to you. I thought, that people are giving her food. Maybe, I don't know if anyone's going to eat this, or you can give this to her too. So then he was like, oh, I thought you were giving me a gift. Subhanallah. That's the level of shukr that you see in the lives of mashayikh. That for the smallest of bounties, they're appreciated. And if you look in the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you will see the same message. In a hadith of Sahih Bukhari, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "La tahqiranna jaratan li jaratiha," that no person should ever look down on any gift whatsoever that their neighbor gives them, even if it's as insignificant as walau finishing ashatin, even if it's as insignificant as the trotters of a lamb. You find when it comes to the feet like are on the hooves in that area, which normally we make paya out of. Allahu a'lam if it was always a delicacy in the past. Allahu a'lam. But in this days, a lot of times it's considered a delicacy, paya. But if you look at that portion of the lamb, it has the least, or any animal, has the least amount of meat, the least amount of fat, the least amount of things that you can actually benefit from. And in order to prepare it, it requires lots of preparation. Like first you have to skin it, then you have to burn you have to make sure that you burn all the hairs, and then even to boil it, how much food are you actually going to get out of it? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentions, لا تحقرن جارة لجارتها ولو فرسين شاة, that no one should at all ever dare to deem insignificant a gift that they get from their neighbor, even if it be as insignificant as trotters of a lamb. So from here we understand, subhanAllah, there is a reason. Rasulullah ﷺ also mentioned, coupled with this hadith, مَنْ لَمْ يَشْكُرِ النَّاسِ لَمْ يَشْكُرِ اللَّهِ, that if you can't even be grateful to people, you'll never be able to be grateful to Allah. One way of explaining this hadith is because when a person gives you a bounty, then you see the mun'im, you see the fact that I never had this and I am receiving it. So if you can't even be grateful to someone who is openly giving you a gift, how in the heavens world are you supposed to be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when He's giving you time and again, and you can't even see the bounties so many times? And another way to understand this, if you couple it with the hadith, لا تحقرن جارة نجارتها, the previous hadith that we mentioned, then a person will understand, if you can't even be grateful to a person for the smallest of gifts that they bestow you with. And there's a huge lesson. Many a times alhamdulillah, we all get gifts from time to time. But sometimes we look down on gifts that we get. Like sometimes a person may go so far and they'll bring you, they will bring you a simple itar or a seemingly cheap itar. Maybe it's not that high quality, it's like a $2 itar or something like that. It doesn't even smell the best. So then when you get it and you're like, yeah, Jazakullahu Khairan. Or sometimes we don't even, just like, oh, thank you. Maybe you don't even want to make dua at that time. So you're just like, thank you, instead of Jazakullahu Khairan. We as Muslims should say, Jazakumullahu Khairan, may Allah reward you. But that's not the way that we are taught to be. We are taught to be extremely appreciative of anything that we are given. Even if it be something because of the mere fact that the person, subhanAllah, he went so far and we don't even realize his resources could have been quite limited, yet he thought of you and he brought back something for you. That in itself is such a great thing to be grateful for, such a thing to appreciate another person for. And when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are so many different bounties that we are blessed with every single day, that if we can't even be grateful for these small things that others are giving when we can see it, how are we supposed to be grateful for every single breath of air that we are taking? How are we supposed to be grateful for every single time that we are able to swallow? Or how are we supposed to be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for every time we're able to blink? Some people realize the older they get, sometimes they develop major eye problems because of the fact that the fluid in their eyes are slowly drying out, or slowly it's becoming much more difficult for them. So they require eye drops. I remember my grandmother, she required eye drops constantly in order for her to function normally without any difficulty. So when you see that, وَمَن نُعَمِّرْهُ نُنَكِّسْهُ فِي الْخَلْقِ, but when you see the different bounties Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed a person with, the fact that your mere cells are not malfunctioning every day when you wake up is something that we have to be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for. And this is the first thing that Imam Ghazali rahimahullah has mentioned. To develop the quality of becoming a shakir, you have to constantly thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for everything. You just have to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for everything. We also understand in the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one advice Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has given is to stay and look at those lower than you. If you're going to be living with a people of a higher class and constantly looking at the commodities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed them with, then instead of being appreciative for what Allah has granted you, you're constantly going to want more and more and more and more. So when you're walking through the parking lot of Dar es Salaam, for example, instead of looking at all the Corvettes and the Lamborghinis and the Teslas, depending on your status and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you with, look at the broken down cars of some of the students, and look at the broken down Honda Accords, or not even a Honda Accord is a nice car. Allahu A'lam. Look at the broken down cars, the cars that subhanAllah have huge dents and impacts in them, and make shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has protected me, Allah has blessed me with this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted me a car to take me from point A to point B, to take care of all of my needs. And then this will develop inshallah furthermore. So number one is conscientize yourself, constantly remind yourself. For every breath that you're taking, make shukr. Sometimes you're walking, taking a fresh breath of fresh air. That's something to make shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for. When we're doing our tasbihat and you're saying, Alhamdulillah, tasbih Fatimi after salah, Alhamdulillah, think of different bounties that Allah has blessed you with. Think of the fact that, and the more that you look at others who are not blessed as much, then inshallah, and you divert your attention to those type of individuals, the more appreciative a person is going to be. So this is something that we can inshallah do. Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, he continues and he says, when a person begins to do this, when you begin to constantly remind yourself of the different bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and recognize the bounties of Allah, then this will result in two more qualities that will develop. But if they are not attended to, then a person will not really achieve the heights of shukr. He will not maximize on this on this concept. What is the second thing that is created? When a person constantly reminds himself of the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the first thing which is created is known as a hal. This is when a person becomes happy and pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the more that you thank Allah for the various different bounties, the happier you become with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The more pleased you are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Similarly, like the ulama, they mention that the relationship that a person can have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, many a times, they equate it with the relationship that one has with a significant other, or one has with, it's a relationship of love and appreciation. So the more a spouse is appreciative to their spouse and shows affection and is happy with their spouse, the more happy times they enjoy together. The more negative they are with one another, the more critical they are with one another, the more difficulties that they experience. So when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more grateful a person, the more you recognize how much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing for you, the more you contemplate on that, the happier you will become with your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But a person at that particular time needs to shift his attention. So Imam Ghazali mentions that one should be pleased with the bounty. You should be happy that Allah is blessing you with something, of course, since it is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But together with this is the important part, or this is the part that not everyone focuses on. One must portray a form of humility and servitude. So what is meant by this is, he gives an example. He says, if a king gifts a horse to one of his servants, then the slave will be pleased due to one of three reasons. Either he's going to be happy because, number one, he received something beneficial by which he could fulfill many of his needs. Like when we receive a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or anything, then we are happy. Why? Because now I have another thing and I can do many other things with this which prior to that I could not have done. A second reason for which he could be pleased, he could be happy, is he could be pleased because this gift shows the mere fact that the king has placed his gaze on him and has granted him attention, and there is then further hope in the future that he will attain something superior, a greater gift in the future. So the first reason is he's happy because he received something and now he can do other things with that. The second thing is now he is happy because of the mere fact that the king thought of him. And since he's now in the thoughts of the king can also give him further gifts in the future. And the last reason, or the last thing that Imam Ghazali rahimahullah mentions is he says that this person would be pleased because now he understands that he has achieved something which he can now use so that he can go into the presence of the king and serve him and develop a relationship further. So he continues and he says, if you think about it, Imam Ghazali rahimahullah is mentioning, the first type is not even shukr in any real sense. It's not really any form of gratitude. Because you're not thanking you're not appreciative to the one who granted you that bounty. You are merely appreciative at the bounty itself. You are merely grateful for the bounty itself. Because of the mere fact that now you can do so many other things, other doors have been opened for you. But this is for a person whose gaze is fixed and is restricted to the commodity, and it doesn't go beyond that to the one who is blessing that individual with that bounty. He says that's not even shukr in the first place. Then he says the second type is included in the definition of shukr, where a person is grateful at the mere fact that someone thought of them. So when you realize that this bounty came from Allah, and my Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He was so kind, and out of all the individuals in the world, He actually granted it to me, and He is appreciative to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that fact. That's a higher level of, or you can say that is the beginning of true shukr. And then he mentions, but truly, it is weak when compared to the third type, which is the ideal greatest form of shukr. The greatest form of shukr is when a person recognizes that the bounty came from Allah, this ni'mah, this bounty came from Allah, and he doesn't restrict himself to being grateful solely for the bounty and moving on with his life, but rather he directs his attention to the mun'im, the one who is blessing him with the bounty. Not only does he thank him and appreciate him for the fact that he, out of all people, was granted this bounty, but he also takes it another step and he thinks, how can I please my Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and show Him my gratitude to the bounty that He gave me? Like for example, if a person is blessed, with the example usually used for the winter time, if someone is battling, it's very difficult. Outside you can see he's having such a difficult time, struggling with the cold. He's taking his jacket and he's putting it over his head and he's walking, he's bundled up. Or maybe he has like a shawl and he's trying to wrap himself, his whole entire whole head and body, everything, because he's having a very difficult time with the cold. But still too, that shawl or that small cloth is not really doing much. And you thought, subhanAllah, this person is going through such difficulty. Maybe he didn't have the time or the ability or the resources to go and buy himself a nice warm hat. So let me go and get it for him. So you went and you bought him a nice warm hat. And then you gifted it to him. Now, one thing that he could do is he could be, of course, that person would, inshallah, should normally be grateful. But the worst category is where they don't even show appreciation, which unfortunately there are such people in the dunya. May Allah protect us from being amongst them, where we are not grateful for the bounties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses us with and that others bless us with. Then you have a second level of individuals. You will see that, or you can say that if the days continue and you examine this person, you see him still suffering despite the fact that you gave him that gift, then you'll kind of, you will wonder, look, I gave you this, you were going through such difficulty, why aren't you using it? Because in your mind you understand that when you utilize the bounty that was granted, that is also a form of appreciation. That is something that the bestower of the bounty will be happy with. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ أَن يُرَى أَثَرَ نِعْمَتِهِ عَلَى عَبْدِهِ أو كما قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Allah loves to see the effects of His bounty on His servants. He loves to see when His servants use what Allah has blessed them with for the betterment of deen, for the sake of coming closer to Allah. And that's what Imam Ghazali rahimahullah mentions as the highest form of shukr, is when you not only appreciate the bounty, not only do you appreciate the fact that the one who bestowed you with the bounty selected you of all people, but number three, you use that bounty to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he mentions, subhanAllah, he gives various different examples. He says, for example, how can you show shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the eyes that He has blessed you with? You be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and number one, for the fact that He blessed you with eyes. And there are so many people in this dunya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not granted vision to. And there are certain people who Allah has granted it to for a limited time. And those individuals, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has mentioned that if they exercise patience, for them is Jannah. But to be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the fact that He blessed you with it. To be appreciative of the fact that Allah has maintained that bounty for you. And then finally to use it in the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to come closer, to read Quran, to see the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout the earth, to recognize the signs of the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ulama mention also, how can a person create khushu' within himself? A person can create khushu' within themselves by, when you're coming for salah, you look at your surrounding environment and you make shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You use your eyes to recognize the signs of the greatness. When you're coming for Fajr and you see the sky is slowly becoming more beautiful and is slowly becoming brighter, and all the various different colors which are shining through the sky, the chirping of the birds, and the sight itself is a sight to behold. especially the Hanafi, they mention that isfirar al-shams, when slowly, or isfar, when the sky slowly begins to change color and become brighter and yellower, then this is a sight to behold. This is a sign of the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That every single day the sun is rising so beautifully, so meticulously, shining and brightening up the entire world. This is definitely one of the signs of the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When it comes to other clocks, and it comes to other things in the dunya, it requires constant attention. It has to be recalibrated, it has to be fixed, it has to be so on and so forth. When it comes to these various different celestial bodies throughout the entire dunya, when it comes to the dunya itself, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not require someone to come and fix it, but rather Allah in His greatness, it's rising every single day. It's a sight to behold. When a person is coming towards the Dhuhr Salah, you'll see that generally it's right after the sun is smack dab in the middle of the sky, right after it moves from that place. This is where the sun is in its highest peak, subhanAllah, where it's hottest throughout the region, throughout the area. This is a sight to behold again. When a person sees how extremely bright now everything has become, this is a sign of the greatness of Allah. So you're supposed to use your eyes like that every salah time. If you think about it, Asr salah time, when the shadows now, according to the Hanafi madhab, according to Imam Hanifa rahimahullah's opinion, when the shadows now reach double their length, that's the time. Over here you can say it's practiced upon regularly throughout the year, Asr time. So this is also a sight to behold, and so on and so forth. But when a person uses these eyes for other things, then instead of being a means of shukr, it's actually kufranun ni'mah, is outright rejecting the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he mentions one of the greatest forms of kufranun ni'mah, disappreciation in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is misusing these faculties, especially those of the eyes, to look at haram, or those of the ears. You can listen to halal or you can listen to haram. You can listen to ayat of Quran, you can listen to talks of deen, come closer to Allah, make shukr by using these bounties, or you can again use the opposite. So this is the second thing, hal. When a person develops this hal of appreciation, then he has to focus his attention on the Creator, and then that will result in the last thing which we already did discuss, which is amal. Amal is acting in accordance to that hal. So you have reached, once you ponder about the great qualities of the great blessings Allah has blessed a person with, and you think about it and you ponder about it, then a person will become, his relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will definitely improve. Like a person in a relationship with their spouse, they think about all the positive things and all the good things that has come out of the relationship. You'll increase, you'll become much more happier. Once that is achieved, then you're required to focus your attention, not shift it from the blessing and focus on the one who is doing the blessing, the mun'im, not the ni'mah. And then lastly, a person should use those faculties in accordance to the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to show true appreciation. Like that servant who uses the horse, he doesn't just marvel at the horse, he's not just appreciative of the fact that the king thought of him, but he goes beyond that, and he uses the horse to come closer to the king and to serve the king. So this is something that we should do with all the bounties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with. The last thing is, we can understand how important shukr is, again, by the fact that this is one of the ibadat which will continue even through Jannah. And also, this is something that we have to conscientize ourselves with, and it's as easy as constantly reminding yourself. That's the way to improve, to constantly remind yourself. To constantly remind yourself again and again and again. And this is what we have to do. And this is something that shaitan has made it one of the different threats that shaitan issued, or that shaitan gave in his conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala against humanity, is that he told Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, ثُمَّ لَآتِيَنَّهُمْ مِنْ بَيْنِ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ وَعَنْ أَيْمَانِهِمْ وَعَنْ شَمَائِلِهِمْ. I will come from right, left, up, down, every nook and corner, every direction possible to mislead your servants. And then what did he say? What did shaitan say? Shaitan said, وَلَا تَجِدُ أَكْثَرَهُمْ شَاكِرِينَ. I will ensure that most of them, you will find that they will not be grateful. It is shaitan's job to ensure that we are ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we do not appreciate the bounties of Allah. It is shaitan's influence, and it's his objective that we live lives wherein we are constantly looking at, or constantly depressed, not reflecting on the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is shaitan's job to ensure that we live such lives wherein we are ungrateful servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions elsewhere in the Quran, قَلِيلًا مَا تَشْكُرُونَ وَقَلِيلٌ مِّنْ عِبَادِيَ الشَّكُورِ. How few of my servants are those who are actually truly grateful. And the most frightening thing, the scariest thing in the Quran, perhaps one of the most frightening ayat of the Quran, is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَلَقَدْ صَدَّقَ عَلَيْهِمْ إِبْلِيسُ ظَنَّهُ. That shaitan was right in many of the things that he said. He saw through his thoughts. فَاتَّبَعُوهُ إِلَّا فَرِيقًا مِّنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. So many people followed him, except for a small group of believers. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those group of believers. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to live a life wherein we are amongst the true shakirun, where we are truly grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this dunya and all the way to, inshallah, in Jannah as well. Wa akhiru da'wan, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Inshallah, we'll make a little bit of dhikr, and afterwards we can, inshallah, perform Salatul Ishraq, and then we can enjoy the beloved food. And all the while we can, inshallah, make shukr. As you're making dhikr also of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you should think about the various different bounties Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses you with. Generally also, when you are making, we will make dhikr of La ilaha illallah, nafi ithbat. And when you're making this type of dhikr, then a person should think that he should rid his heart of everything except for the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you are saying La ilaha, then you are recognizing that there is no one, nothing that can benefit you, nothing that can be of assistance, nothing whatsoever can provide you with any good outcome except for Allah. As though you're ridding your heart of everything. And then when you say illallah, except for Allah, only the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should remain in a person's heart. This is the reason for which we have been created. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. To truly recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our creator. When a person does this, then inshallah it will result in many praiseworthy results. Inshallah, we'll start off by reciting the du'as of dhikr. Allahumma aftah. You can repeat after me. Allahumma aftah أقفال قلوبنا بذكرك وأتمم علينا نعمتك وأسبغ علينا من فضلك واجعلنا من عبادك الصالحين. اللهم افتح مسامع قلوبنا بذكرك وارزقنا طاعتك وطاعة رسولك وعملا بكتابك. اللهم أعنا على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. اللهم طهر قلبي عن غيرك ونور قلبي بنور معرفتك أبدا. يا الله يا الله يا الله. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أفضل الذكر لا إله إلا الله 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 محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. لا إله إلا الله 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 محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا إله إلا الله 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 محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا إله إلا الله 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 محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم اللهم لك الحمد كله ولك الشكر كله لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك جل وجهك وعز جاهك ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير الحي القيوم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد كلما ذكره الذاكرون وصل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد كلما غفل عن ذكره الغافلون اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين وصل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد مفتاح خزائن رحمتك اللهم افتح لنا بسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ما أغلق علينا من خير الدنيا والآخرة اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد عبدك ورسولك النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا 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 ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إنا كنا من الظالمين الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم إنا نسألك موجبات رحمتك وعزائم مغفرتك والغنيمة من كل بر والسلامة من كل إثم لا تدع لنا ذنبا إلا غفرته ولا هما إلا فرجته ولا حاجة هي لك رضا إلا قضيتها ويسرتها يا أرحم الراحمين ويا أكرم الأكرمين اللهم اجعلنا من الشاكرين اللهم اجعلنا من الشاكرين اللهم اجعلنا من الشاكرين اللهم اجعلنا من عبادك المخلصين المخلصين العالمين العاملين يا أرحم الراحمين ويا أكرم الأكرمين ربنا واجعلنا
مسلمين لك ومن ذريتنا أمة مسلمة لك وأرنا مناسكنا وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم توفنا مسلمين والحقنا بالصالحين غير خزايا ولا ندامة ولا مفتونين يا أرحم الراحمين ويا أكرم الأكرمين. Ya Allah, enable us and grant us the tawfiq and the husn tawfiq to be amongst your selected servants, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin, that are truly grateful and thankful to you, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin. Ya Allah, open up our eyes and allow us to recognize all of the various different bounties that you have blessed us with, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin, that you are constantly blessing us with, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin, without any even deserving, Ya Allah, despite the fact that we do not deserve any bounty, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin wa Ya Akram al-Akramin. Ya Allah, forgive us, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin, where we are falling short. Ya Allah, guide us, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin, if we are misusing these bounties that you have given us, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin, and allow us to solely use them for your, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin, your obedience, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin. Ya Allah, grant us a special connection with you, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin. Ya Allah, grant us ease, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin, in all of our difficulties, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin. Protect us from difficulties, grant us afiyah, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin. Allahumma inna nas'aluka al-afwa wal-afiyah wal-mu'afat ad-da'ima fi ad-din wa ad-dunya wal-akhirah, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin wa Ya Akram al-Akramin. All of our beloved brothers and sisters that are suffering throughout the world, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin, Ya Allah, grant them afiyah and grant them ease, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin. Ease their suffering, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin, and rid them of their oppressors, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin. Ya Allah, grant all of us the ability, all the Muslims throughout the world, to truly, Ya Arham ar-Rahim, profess your oneness and be grateful to Ya Arham ar-Rahimin and live such lives which are according to that, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin wa Ya Akram al-Akramin. Oh Allah, we ask you from all of the good that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has asked you, and we seek protection, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin, from all the evil that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has sought protection for you from you for, Ya Arham ar-Rahimin. Allahumma inna nas'aluka min kulli khairin ahata bihi ilmuka fi dunya wal akhirah wa na'udhu bika min kulli sharrin ahata bihi ilmuka fi dunya wal akhirah wa anta al-musta'an wa alayka al-balagh wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-'aliyyil 'azim. Jazallahu 'anna nabiyyana Muhammadan sallallahu alaihi wasallam wa huwa ahluhu wa jazal al-anbiya kullahum khairan wa salamun 'alal mursalin. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ameen bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. If we inshallah do 2 rak'ahs with the intention of Salatul Ishraq, and you do also coupled with the intention that you can receive the reward of having performed Hajj and Umrah, and accepted Hajj and Umrah. As Rasulullah ﷺ has mentioned, that person who comes for Fajr Salah, performs Fajr Salah in Jama'ah, and then he remains seated, engaged in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is considered dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then he performs 2 rak'ahs of Salah with this intention, then inshallah he will receive the reward of having completed Hajj and Umrah. And in narration, Rasulullah ﷺ mentions tamma, completed Hajj and Umrah. So we can do it with that intention as well. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us tawfiq.